As democracy is perfected, the office of president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be adorned by a downright moron.
Well, that was a quotation from Henry Mencken, H.L. Mencken. It's not his voice. I don't think it's his voice at all, but somebody reading what they believe his voice might sound like. There is one existing interview of Mencken in which we have a recording of his voice, and it sounds nothing like that. However, the sentiments expressed in that quote are accurate and apt for today. For tomorrow is Election Day, the midterms. My prediction, of course, is that unhappiness increases regardless of whoever wins offices. And this is a theoretical prediction, not just an empirical one. And that's what this podcast is about right here. If you haven't already, go back and read part 1 of this article, which is that voting causes suspicion and distrust. That's linked on the blog. Both that article and this are modified excerpts. I shortened them, basically, from my book, Everything You Believe is Wrong. Now, in the first part, we basically discussed the difference between voting in situations in which there are shared goals, which are situations in which elections can work to produce happiness, and other situations in which there are largely unshared goals, situations in which elections will produce only discord and unhappiness. And the real brief review of the previous chapter was that if we have largely shared goals, we're just interested in finding the best man for the job. We're voting for the best potential candidate. And if he wins and your candidate does not, if we all share the same goals, largely share the same goals, well, we're still happy in a way because we share a culture. We're still aiming in the same direction. It's just that you thought this other guy would be better to get us there, and I thought my guy would be better to get us there. On the other, you could compromise in the end and say, well, maybe this guy will still get where we want to go. You're not entirely dissatisfied with the voting process because it is still pointing in the direction you want to go. Contrast that with a situation in which the culture is not shared, in which we have unshared goals. Here we're not really voting for the man that's going to get us to the place we want to be, not per se. We're voting for the direction we want to go in. And when we're voting for the direction we want to go in, we want to go in opposite directions, completely orthogonal with one another. That's when discord happens. If you win, I'm going to be, of course, deeply unhappy that we're now going in the wrong direction. Deeply unhappy. Voting has not worked. Voting is taking us in the wrong direction. On the other hand, you've won the vote, but you, happy that you've won and heading in the direction you think we should be going, are also unhappy with the vote because you came close to losing. You came close to letting our side take over and take us in the wrong direction. So both sides begin to suspect voting is not bringing them where they want to be. Both sides increase efforts to manipulate voting. So that's what the first chapter is all about. Now, let's get into this. Well, it's all actually in the same chapter. I shouldn't say it's a separate chapter. These are separate sections. This is the most difficult and theoretical chapter in Everything You Believe is Wrong. But I think it's the most pertinent because we're married to these elections. Now, this is the section, Variety is the Spiciness of Elections. Now, of course, in most large-scale elections, a variety of goals is the rule. There's not just one goal, there's many. The problem is people can't always remember all of them. Worse, it's usually considered good policy of the rival parties to focus the electorate only on the unshared goals. This moves things in the direction of the second scenario we talked about just a minute ago, in which there's no shared goals, but where it only seems as if there's no shared goals. Uncertainty in who is the best man is again irrelevant because the goals between the two sides are made to seem entirely different, even if they're not. And that happens naturally because if unless you're speaking just about the man, you're going to talk about goals. You're going to be splitting people apart. Now, as groups polarize over these goals, a polarization which must come sooner or later, the more the electorate resembles a pure democracy, then unless one side can convince the other of the sanity and righteousness of their goals, a split, possibly violent, is bound to occur. I'm going to repeat that. A split is bound to occur. This splitting is not a logical necessity. I'm not here telling you this is a logical necessity. This necessarily follows. But given its history of voting in democracies, this is an extremely sensible prediction. So that's just going to happen. Okay, now, well, here's the next section. When can we all get along? Shared goals, or mostly shared goals, and the maintenance and communication of as many shared goals as possible is why voting works when it does work. I don't want to say voting never works, okay? I'm just saying the more we move towards a complete democracy in which a complete democracy is everybody voting on everything. And there's a subsection or a section inside this chapter showing, too, the increase in the electorate, the increase in the people who are eligible to vote. It's only gone up. I can't remember the exact figure now, but it's something like, it started out around 10-20% in America when it was founded. It's now up around 70% or more. And the number of things we vote on is only increasing, too. So this is all bad news because this generalized voting is what causes these splits that we're seeing. But it's not always the case. Voting can work. Of course voting can work. So, for instance, I give the example, voting for a new leader in a voluntary professional society. That's a good example. These positions are more or less honorary and in large part public relations oriented. The majority of the members are glad they don't have to serve. Plus, all members have the shared goal of making the organization look good and thus enhancing their own reputations. And these kind of elections, of course, rarely lead to trouble. And when they do, it's because the direction the organization should take, according to its members, has diverged. Same thing. So this can happen when fields become more specialized and they come sort of naturally split, or when some members embrace a new theory or practice that leaves the traditional members cold. But you won't hear of marches, or cry-ins or days of rage when a clique fails to have their man elected as leader of, say, a chemical society. But you might see the society cleaving into the People's Chemical Society and the Chemicals for People Society. Well, the same thing happens in democracies. Civil war results, chaos results, anarchy results, and a strong man inevitably appears. So here's the fallacy. Here's the voting fallacy. This is where the fallacy lies, that voting works. And when people say voting works, they mean it always works. I say it doesn't always work. It can, but it doesn't always, and it especially doesn't in a democracy. And yes, I'm aware of the difference. America is supposed to be founded as a constitutional republic and so on and so forth, but we're moving closer to a democracy as time goes on, and this is unfortunate, and you hear the regime speak nothing of anything else except save our democracy. Vote only for this party to preserve our democracy. Vote only this way and on this question and only this way to preserve our democracy. Now, voting does work again, but only in those situations where the culture is largely shared. The culture is largely shared. So in voting where to go out to lunch in a company, a small group of people inside of a company, well, they largely share the same culture. Even though the guy's getting the wrong place to go to lunch, he's still not going to be unhappy with everybody that's with him. So voting can work when the culture is shared. But when there's sharp divisions, voting necessarily must, and will fail some people. Absolutely will fail them. It's not insulting or demeaning to hear at the time of election at the time of an election loss, how voting worked. It is insulting and demeaning, I should say, that you've just lost and you hear, but the process worked, voting worked. It did not work. It failed you. This is the voting works fallacy. Okay, so now in major elections, like for president and these midterm senatorial races and things like this, there's always a pool of people who call themselves undecideds. People whose attention, all sides of the vote, the candidates, that is to say, they court. Though there is a feigned love of these folks when they're being wooed, there's also a disdain toward them because they haven't chosen a side. Not a side about the level of uncertainty of which candidate's going to do a better job again, but on which side of the set of goals they should embrace. Now, it's forgotten these people are those folks who still believe they're in a monoculture. They still believe that they hold mostly shared goals with everybody else. They don't hold to the extreme goals the other two sides do, but instead share the majority of non-controversial, you can use air quotes around that if you like, goals that both sides actually hold but fail to consider. For undecideds, the election is more about uncertainty in reaching the shared goals, who's the best man, and not aiming for one set of goals over another. This suggests it would be well to entice these people by appealing to these shared goals and boasting of a candidate's greater chance in reaching those shared goals. Of course, this doesn't happen. Instead, the candidates and their parties more usually try to convince the undecideds to embrace their set of goals and reject the other side's. This is effective too, of course, to some degree, but it guarantees a greater disharmony after the election. Democracy just is discord by definition. Every move towards greater democracy thus will, but not necessarily must, this is a contingent observation, increase discord. Widening the electorate fails to cause an increase in discord only when the new voters added largely share the same goals as the current voters. When they do not, as in when there's mass immigration, it increases discord. Voting increases discord. Now, consider that it was once, of course, much more likely for people within states to have shared cultures than with the country as a whole. That was Georgians were different than Ohioans, for instance, if only because states are comprised of smaller groups. So that when the state's mandate to elect senators by legislatures was removed to the populace, in other words, the general electing senators became the purview of the population, elections become more tumultuous. Well, just as we would expect as we become more towards a regular democracy. Similarly, it can't be that 16-year-olds can share the same goals as, say, 60-year-olds. Lowering the voting age must increase the possibility for factions, and did so when we in America changed voting to include 18-year-olds, and it increased turmoil. And this 16-year-old, I mean, you can scoff at this, but there is an enormous group of people, all academics, of course, and bien pensant, the people who think beautifully, who want to have children included in the general voting. This is the problem of democracy and the god of equality. When you say everybody is the same, it's only natural to act as if everybody is the same. And so we have this increasing electorate. Now, we've already talked about increased immigration. That will also increase turmoil and dissension and cause fractions and factions and discord and disharmony. It has to. Diversity is our weakness. And there's no other way around that. Now, as I said, it's worth noting, as all great scholars have since Aristotle on down, that once this bifurcation process gets started in a democracy, it always tends to the same violent end, unless something exterior or external occurs which reunites the people, which can happen. I don't know what this would be, but it can happen. Well, there's more to this chapter. This is only an excerpt. I'm not going to keep going on and on about this, but I think you have the idea by now. Well, Happy Election Day tomorrow.
You all join me in singing this one.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds if we're together? Just sing a song and bring the sunny weather. Happy trails